Hello, and welcome to a podcast or Periscope or whatever we're going to call this that I was going to do yesterday, but then the Golden Knights were terrible, and I decided I'm not going to do it because I do have this I go into a lot of the games where I'm like, oh, I'm going to do something after this game. This is the one. And then the game ends up being crap, and then I'm like, does anybody really want to do this? Like everyone kind of checked out of that game pretty early, and really the main thing is I end up getting bogged down in that particular game when it's like whatever, right? Like I kind of look at that game, I kind of look at last night, the New York Islander game, and it's like didn't really have it. Scored early, needed more power play time, didn't really get it. That is something I'm going to get into because I talked to Cassidy about that. And I do think that that's an interesting aspect of what's going on. But like when push comes to shove, like that game's probably going to be forgettable. I mean, I guess the Utah game, 6-0, we still kind of remember that. It started a little bit of a run. If this one starts to run one way or the other, maybe we remember it. But like the overall 10,000-foot view or whatever you want to call it, I don't know what's the number. The bird's eye view, right, at the midway point is 59 points in 41 games. Like, there have been some injuries, not as significant as maybe years past, but for the most part, 59 points, 41 games, like that's a 118 point pace. We're in really good shape here. Like, playoffs seem like they're pretty well under control. Winning the division is probably still likely. I think that could potentially change. The argument I would make is it doesn't really matter as long as it's Vegas or Edmonton. I don't think you want to play Edmonton in the first round. And that's not necessarily because I don't think Vegas can beat Edmonton. I do think they can beat Edmonton. I will probably pick them if they play Edmonton. I just think the path gets progressively harder if you have to deal with Edmonton earlier. Like it would be ideal to deal with Edmonton in the Western Conference final as opposed to having to deal with them in the first round and then whoever wins a Kings Canucks series and then having to deal with whoever's the best of Minnesota, Winnipeg, Colorado. Like there's a lot of teams and I just think that the buildup is not easy. So that's kind of where we're at. I don't want to go overboard about a game against the Islanders that, quite frankly, there wasn't a lot going on. Like the Golden Knights made a couple of mistakes. I thought the Islanders made fewer. That's probably what comes down to in that particular game. I will say I don't want to play the Islanders in a playoff series, which is ridiculous because they're not very good. But I do think there is something to that style that it's just like on any given night, they can get you. And I think that's what happened. So that's why I'm like, let's wait till tomorrow. Let's do a broader overview. And I had a whole bunch of topics that a bunch of different people sent in. So we're going to do a little bit more focus on more at this point of the year, everyone's kind of asking me the same thing. We get the first one here from Coyote in the chat. I had a couple of them on Twitter. I got one via text. Like there's been basically everyone kind of saying the same question, and that's focused on the trade deadline. The trade deadline's still about 2 months away. It's in early March. To me, the Golden Knights are very rarely going to do nothing at a trade deadline. Like it's really just not in their nature. If you go back to the history of George McPhee, I think there's been one or two trade deadlines ever that he's completely sat out. And those were early 2000s. The McCrimmon has never sat out a trade deadline. I don't think whether they're going well, whether they're going poorly, somewhere in between. This year seems to be obviously mostly going well. I think they're going to do something. Now, I don't think that this is a year when you look at what's upcoming, what they have in the draft cupboard, what the prospects look like, what the options are going to be that are out there. I don't think this is a year where they're going to go out and find one of their best 3 or 4 players. Like if you go back, they got Eichel via trade, they got Stone via trade. You know, those are some of their best players. Pacioretty, you could have made an argument when they got him via trade. That's one of their best players. Sign the deal that Petrangelo comes in. Hanifin, one of their best players, came via trade. In theory, Hurdle should have been one of their best players via trade. I don't think we're going down that path. I think we're more going down the path of what you looked at 2 years ago. I think they're going to really try to lean into this is 2022, 23 again. You look at a lot of the metrics, they're fairly similar. You look at the fact that they're a little bit more rested off of the playoffs or missing the playoffs the year before, going out in the first round last year. I think they're going to try to really lean into that. And you're starting to see that a little bit with some of the narrative that's going on from the team channels. It's like, look, this is kind of similar to the year that, remember what happened at the end of that year. I think that blueprint is one that they're probably going to continue looking at, which is really try to find the perfect fit that is available and not crazy over the top. It was similar that year. I think it was a little less important that year than it is going to be this year. So while I'm going to kind of poo-poo the deadline to a degree, and I think we're going to probably end up doing that for the next, whatever it is, 8 weeks, 7 weeks or so until we get there. I think what happens at the deadline is going to be important. They have to find someone who's going to make a difference. I don't know that this particular team, as it currently stands, wins 16 playoff games. Like I just am not quite there. But I think a very, very subtle shift can do it. Like I don't think it takes a lot. And part of that is because I don't fully believe that this team's going to be able to go through all of the postseason healthy. I think you're probably going to deal with some injuries. That's normal. That's not like anything against these guys or any of that. It's just that's what's normal. And I think the depth right now of forwards, especially wingers, and because we've kind of had to look at moving Hurdle out of the center, maybe it shifts there. But the forward group, when fully healthy, which it appears we're really close to, looks like Barbashev's going to play tomorrow against New York. And then it wouldn't shock me if Nick Waugh plays as soon as Sunday. Maybe that one lasts a little bit longer, but we're very close to getting there. That's where you're going to have one of Holtz or Schwint as a healthy scratch. You're going to have all of the guys kind of back in a position where you want to be. And then I'm going to get to Hurdle next and where we go from there. He's going to be in a position that's going to be a lot less important to the 5-on-5 than he has been over the course of the last few weeks. That's where it's like that year they found Barbashev. They also went out and bought Jonathan Quick, which I don't think he was all that good. He apparently was a fairly significant locker room presence. If they can find something like that again, cool. But I didn't really make a huge difference in regards to the games. But Bluger was the other one, and he really didn't make a huge impact. They were hoping he was going to be more of a penalty killer and really didn't, but the price was low. So they kind of took two shots. The price was a lot higher on Barbashev, giving up what was effectively a first-round pick in Zach Dean. I think you could go down that path. Like, I think 2 seconds is kind of the max what you want to give up. If something really jumps out, maybe you look down the Connolly path, or if someone will take the first round pick 2 years from now, maybe. I'm not even sure they want to go down that route. Like, I think more likely it's 2 firsts. The good news is this year, I don't think they're going to have to buy off a ton of salary like they did last year. They had to buy off some salary off Mantha. They had to buy off some salary off Hannafin. They had to buy off some salary off of Hurdle. Don't think they're going to have to do as much of that because they can just drop guys off the roster and put themselves in a position where they have more space. Plus, it's the after deadline thing. All of that comes through. They're in a much better place. But I do think it is going to be important. The needs to me are very clearly forwards who can do it all, but more defensive minded forwards. I think if you stick a more defensive minded forward in there and you stick a guy where you're like, yeah, this guy's great along the walls, this guy's great helping us back check. This guy's great in his own end. He's a penalty killer. If you can get all of that, I think it's going to free up Olofsson. It'll free up not Barbashev. Barbashev has been pretty good either way, but it'll free up Dorofeev. Maybe it even allows you an opportunity to put Holtz in a more offensive situation with more offensive players and less responsibility defensively. Like, I think that perfect fit could be there. Who it is, I still don't know. I'm not ready at this point to declare teams in or out, even though we probably can and really look down it. I usually wait for some of those draft boards to come out or those trade boards to come out, and I kind of take a look through that. basically, if you're looking through it, look at the bad teams, find guys who kill penalties and score goals. That's really the simplest way to look at it. Just pull up a bad team, find a guy on 1 year, 2 years, something of that sort, not much left, either expiring contract or moving on. Those are the ones that I think those are the players that can make the biggest impact, because that simple little shift, that tiny little shift that can happen, that can take a group of lines and really just put it all back in place. Like, I'll give you an example. If you look at the defense, if you were to take Hannafin out of there, and now you have to have Korzak or Hutton in there, and everything shifts around, everything's slightly out of place. Putting Hannafin back in puts everything right back in place. I think Barbashev coming back in does some of that. It's going to allow Hurdle a lesser important role. It's going to give better wingers to potentially Carlson down the line. It's going to give Howden more of an offensive role where he can get a little bit protected to get some of his offense back. I think all of it, Olafson could potentially be in a better place. All of it can help. Add one more guy, and now every single thing ticks down a little bit. And now maybe you are back to Howden and Kolazar on a fourth line with Wah. Like, that's awesome. That is where you want to be. That is where I say, okay, the depth of this team can be where it needs to be, but you're going to have to find that player. So that's kind of where I'm at on that. As far as the Hurdle situation, I think that it's one that they have to be kind of honest with themselves about. Like, I think that at this point in the year, I don't expect it to get a ton better. I'm not completely writing it off for the future, because if you look at 4 years ago now, the year Petrangelo came in, his first season, he was not particularly good for a good portion of the regular season and a beginning of the playoffs. Like, I remember the game, they lost 1-0 to Minnesota, and he turned the puck over. Like, he just never quite fit that season. And I don't know why that happened or what went on there. But then we knew this guy's better than that. He's going to be better than that. We can believe that he's going to be better than that, and give him a full training camp, give him a whole season to figure out what was going wrong. And he's going to make a much bigger impact. I think maybe we're there with Hurdle. Now, I'm not as confident that Hurdle takes the step back to being the player that he was multiple years ago, like I was very confident that Petrangelo was going to do that. In this particular case, I think there's a couple things that have become pretty darn clear to me at this point. One, I don't think he's a center. I don't know that on this team, with the group of players that they have and the way that Howden has played this year, and looking at, can we make a move? Do we buy a center? Do we buy a winger? I think there is an argument to also buy a center at a deadline, or sooner if you want to decide. There's been some discussion about potentially doing it before Four Nations. I think there's an argument to be made that the best lineup that the Golden Knights can make will have a center who's defensively responsible. Presumably it would be Carlson, and Hurdle on his wing. Or if you buy, say, a new center that's defensively responsible, maybe Hurdle is on his wing. I think the second part is there should not really be an expectation that he's the driver of the line. I don't think that that's going to be likely. So you can't do Hurdle, Olafson, Kolazar. You can't do Hurdle, Holtz, Wah. You can't, like, you have to have one of the group of drivers. And I don't think the group of drivers is all that deep on this team at the moment. Eichel, obviously. Stone, obviously. Carlson, I believe, is certainly in that group. And I think Howden potentially can be in that group. I think there's an argument to be made that Howden with Hurdle could be the answer, but it has to be a third, if not fourth line, or at the very least a 3A, 3B with another 3. I think you have to look at this and say the ship's probably sailed for the rest of this season on him, Hurdle, being the dominant offensive piece that they thought they were getting at 5-on-5. In the power play, I want him in there all the time. There's no time that I don't want him on the top power play unit, and therefore he has to be in the lineup. So I'm not trying to push him out of the lineup. I'm not trying to push him off the team. I don't think the trade is some big disaster or anything of that sort at this point. It may get there over time. We will see. But for right now, for this team to win, you have to find a way to make sure that you're not overdoing or putting higher expectations than what are realistic on that player. And because of that, I think that's where you've seen, since we've had Barbashev go out, you've seen a little bit of a drop off in the offense because of the fact that Hurdle has been placed in a position where he is expected to do a little bit more, and it's simply not coming. Last night's a good example. It just wasn't there. Eichel was driving offense. Stone wasn't really driving it all that much, but that happens on different times. It's not that big a deal. Most of the times it's going to be there. If you were to play a 7-game series, you expect him to get that at different times. I don't know that if they played 7 games in a row in that style, we would have ever gotten all that much at 5-on-5 out of Hurdle. I think you potentially could have gotten more out of Carlson, potentially could have got more out of Howden and Kolazar. I don't know that you would have gotten that. That's why, as we move forward, I think it's really important at some point, and presumably soon would be probably right, would be to find time to have Carlson play with Stone. Like, I'll keep banging this drum over the course of probably the next 3 months if it never happens. I think they've got to find a way to make that happen, because that's potentially an option to, if Barbashev and Eichel are very good together and you can put another shooter over there, Olofsson, Pavel, Holtz, probably not, guy you buy at the deadline. Like, if you could find a better offensive player, a better Olofsson, which is a high bar actually at this point for what Olofsson's offered. If you can continue now, that will push other players down. That will allow you to free up Stone to play with Carlson. You know you've got them against the best line every other team has every single night. Like, that's kind of a path that I think then allows now Hurdle can either be the third wheel on that line, or even better, be down the lineup even further, play in what's effectively more of like what used to be considered the fourth line style. Like, that's one thing we don't have this year that we did have in the past. And I think that's something that could have changed a game like last night, could have changed some of these other games where they get off to these slow starts, is they don't really have the line that just throws it in deep, whacks guys into the boards, and then they get off the ice, handing the puck back to a better situation to the next line in front of them. I don't think we have that. I don't think you're going to get that out of like Schwint, Roenbier, Holtz. Like, that's obviously like a cobbled together line based on who's available at that time. But I think as you go forward, you have to try and think, all right, can Hurdle be part of that? Can Hurdle, like Hurdle, Howden, Kolazar is a group that I look at and think that could be the answer. That could be what is effectively a third line playing tight, a fourth line style, being able to be willing to play them against absolutely anybody. Because I don't think Hurdle's some sort of disaster defensively. He's not. Howden's been good defensively, and Kolazar has always been good defensively. I think that group could be. But I think if you do that, you've got to find answers up the lineup. And to me, that's where eventually, and I thought last night was a good opportunity, maybe not going well, doesn't look good. Okay, now try Stone with Carlson at this point when a game has probably gotten away and you're not going to lose much or gain much from it. And you can at least learn something. I think that's something that we can potentially look at. The other thing I wanted to touch on, I'll talk about the two things that I've written stories about recently. But first, I'll tell you that this Periscope and all Periscopes are brought to you by the Jimmerson Law Firm. Jimmerson Law Firm is one of Las Vegas' preeminent law firms specializing in high-stakes business, civil, and family litigation. When winning matters, seek out the Jimmerson Law Firm. Winning has mattered. The Golden Knights have only lost 10 times in regulation through half of the season. That is excellent. But like I said, in one of the articles I recently wrote, there is a red flag there. And I think it's a fairly significant red flag that I'm not saying this is like the Golden Knights are bad because of this, or that this is what's going to be the downfall of the season. This isn't a doom and gloom type thing. However, I do think when you look at The Golden Knights are in first place in the entire NHL. They're in first place in the Western Conference. They're in first place in the division. A lot of that we look at, all right, they're a 59-point team over 41 games. In other words, most teams are not going to be that good. Part of that, I do believe, has been the goalie distribution. The fact that when they have played starting goalies, they are 12 wins, 12 losses. When they have played backup, they are 16 wins, 1 loss. That's a majority of the points. 32 of the 59 points have come against teams that you are expected to beat. When another team plays their backup, you are expected to beat them. Like, I don't think there's any team in the NHL that I would say backup goalie versus Hill or Samsonov. And that is beneficial that we have the Golden Knights have the situation that we don't have the starter or the backup. But I think lines and lines versus what, right? Like our 18 skaters, your 18 skaters are one better goalie than your goalie. Golden Knights should win most of the time. They have done it. They have done it. Now, we understand that the games that are the most important, when we get there, you will not see a backup goalie. Maybe you get lucky and one's out, or you shell a guy and they make the bad decision to change over to the other guy. Maybe you get through one series. You're not getting through 4. You're going to have to beat better goalies. Now, as I mentioned in that article, 2 of the wins are against Stuart Skinner. 1 of the wins is against Jake Ottinger. 1 of the wins is against Connor Hellebuck. So the hardest teams you have to play, they found a way to beat most of those goalies. We know they can do well against Hellebuck. We know they can do well against Ottinger. We also know that at times Ottinger can be good. Ottinger was excellent in the back half of that series. It's one thing that I think, like, we have to keep an eye on, just when you view the overall roster and you view, all right, how good is this team? How much change needs to happen? Do we need to be shifting lines? Do we need to be buying guys at the deadline? What do we need to have happen? How can this team improve? You can't just say 59 points, 41 games, 118 points pace, President's Trophy pace, best team in the NHL. Like, I just don't know that I'm there yet. Like, are they playing the most consistent hockey of any team in the NHL? Yes. Can they beat anybody on any given day? Absolutely. But that has to be figured in. The other one was the article I wrote this morning about penalties. And it's one that I think is one we're just going to have to kind of deal with. It's like you're dealt a bad hand and you try to make the best out of it. In a way, it's also a good hand, but it's also probably, because of the way the special teams are going to operate, I think it's going to end up being disappointing over the course of the remainder of the season and into the playoffs, and that's penalties. The Golden Knights do not take many penalties. They also do not draw many penalties. Now, there is an argument to be made one way or the other, whichever side you want to land on, glass half full, glass half empty. The Golden Knights have really never drawn many penalties. It's not something that they've done all the way through the 8 seasons. They're just not how they typically play. And as the team has evolved, it has really not changed into one that draws a ton of penalties. Flip side, they also don't take a lot of penalties. Now, we know that those two are correlated. If you look down the stats, go to nhl.com/stats, teams, sort it by penalties. All the teams that draw a bunch are also all the teams that get that take a bunch, right? All the teams that don't draw many are also the teams that don't take many. Now, where I think that this is a challenge is against a team like New York, where they're the worst penalty kill and worst power play in the league. Golden Knights are way better than them at 5-on-4. Either way, doesn't matter. Pick a side. Whether we're killing or they have the power play, or the other way around, right? Doesn't make a difference. So in a game like that, you'd love 4 penalties aside. But they're not going to get that type of game because that's not the way they play. Now, Cassidy talked about the fact that, like, they're a strong team. They're strong on their skates. They're strong along the walls. They do not fall down when they don't have to fall down. It takes a lot to knock a Golden Knight off his skates. That's part of why you don't see a lot of the penalties. The Dorofeev one, the video's on the site right now. He talked about it. It's clear as day. There's no debate. Guy's stick goes around Dorofeev's skates. He kind of stumbles over it, has to go behind the puck or behind the net. Scoring chances taken away. Should have been a penalty at that very moment, right? That's not going to happen for this team. They can't just suddenly start falling down. It's not going to go very well, because if they start falling down, they're not going to be the strong team that they were. And a lot of the best parts of what this team has become will go away. So that's one that's just going to have to be something they live with. The best way to live with that is get better at 5-on-5. Be one of the best teams in the NHL at 5-on-5. That's what the team in 2023 was. That's how they won the Stanley Cup. Dominant at 5-on-5. Right now, the way that the roster is currently set up, the way that they attack, and the way that they play defend, and way that they defend, they are probably not going to be a high event offensive juggernaut at 5-on-5. I know what the scoring says. I know what all of it. I understand it. The balance of what it is, names on the page, way that they've played, history, what's going forward, how the league tends to defend a little bit better as the season goes on, how this team tends to score a little bit less as the season goes on. It's unrealistic to expect this team to continue to be an offensive juggernaut as a whole, and especially not at 5-on-5, considering a lot of what they were able to do in the first couple of months was based off getting some power play goals, scoring some empty netters, and just catching teams when they just weren't flat out, just weren't even close to ready. So when we get into playoff series, the benefit that a good power play is going to offer, because the Golden Knights are probably going to have a halfway decent to good power play and a good penalty kill. I think that's where we're headed come most important games and into the playoffs. I think that's fairly clear. You're not going to get quite the benefit of that say a team like Florida, a team like Edmonton is going to get, because there are way more. If you add up penalty kill and power play, if you're over 100, you want more penalties, because you're going to score more often than the other team in those situations. Golden Knights are going to be over 100. They're not going to get quite the value that they were going to get. I just feel bad saying this, but Hurdle isn't clicking. Do you think they'll be able to trade him? He came to the Golden Knights with a full no-move clause, so he will not be traded. He has 5 seasons left after this one, so he's not going to be traded. They've got to figure out what's the best fit, what's the best situation, how do we make it so that it works out better for him. That's just flat out the way it's going to have to go. He's not going to accept another trade, nor should he. He negotiated the full no move into his contract, decided to waive it to come here. As of, I believe it was around the COVID CBA change, it used to be if you waived your no move clause, no trade clause, that it was gone forever. That's not the case anymore. He still has it. He's not going to get traded. They're going to have to find a way to make it work. And I don't know that like a $7 million player, you're going to be a great team having that as fourth line left winger, third line left winger if you're lucky. They're going to have to find a way to make, at least for now, while it's going the way that it's going, they've got to find a way to be a little bit better. Tuesday next week, the Golden Knights are playing Nashville on the road. The game is in Nashville. We are going to Giordano's to watch the game. Everyone knows it's a big game. Everybody understands the importance of that game. Everyone knows that it's going to be fun to watch that game. It's one of the ones that you're going to want to pay attention to. Come to Giordano's, bring a group. We had been doing pub trivia. I've found out that I think it's a little bit too hard, so we're going to change it to something else, because everyone kept Googling the damn answers. I would type the question into Google, and the answer is right there. So I had to make the questions harder that Google didn't even know. So therefore, you have no chance. So now you basically have to guess. And then it became a guessing game, and nobody liked the guessing game. So we're changing it. We're not doing that anymore. We're going to do things that you can't possibly know and Google can't possibly know, and you also feel like you have a chance. Instead, we're going to do prediction stuff. You're going to predict, when does the first penalty come? What is the first penalty? Who gets it? When is the first shot on goal? When is the first goal? Who scores the goal? All these different things. And it's all going to be like easy to answer stuff. You circle it, you hand it in. If you win, your entire table gets all of their food free for that given night. So come to Giordano's. Watch the game with us. Enjoy the game with us. There should be a pretty good crew. Hopefully we can get pretty good attendance, because I want to keep doing this. The more that we do this, the better we can get, the more free stuff I can give away. So if you're available on Tuesday, the game's at 5. I'm going to make it so that you don't have to put your sheet in until at least the end of the first period, probably even a little bit later. So we'll make sure that we can do it from there. So if you can't make it right at 5, that's okay. So definitely come and join us at Giordano's. It is going to be quite fun. Thoughts on Theodore's play this year? I think it's been good. Offensively, it's been up and down at times. Like I think at times it's kind of gone away, and then at other times it's kind of come back. I think when they start to focus on the on the defense getting more active, we actually see Theodore's offense go down a little bit. And then when the defense is not as active, that's when you notice all the other things that Theodore's doing. I think we're in one of those cycles where, like right now, the defense is more active, and therefore you're going to notice Theodore a little bit less because of that. Defensively, there's still some of the issues that we've had forever. They won the Stanley Cup. I'm not that worried about them. I know that he can defend at a high enough level for them to win. So even though you are going to see some of those things at different times and be frustrated about some of the things that we see at different times, the overall fact is he's definitely good enough to make it happen. Let's see what else. Here was one that somebody asked me. Take one thing. Oh, and then I deleted. Nice. Take one thing from the previous coaches that you would give to Cassidy. From DeBoer, I think I would want the easy exit style. So he had like what I used to call the shot suppression machine. I don't think the Golden Knights have to go fully into that. And I don't think I'd want Cassidy to kind of lean fully into that. But one of the things that the DeBoer teams were so damn good at when he was with Vegas, and Dallas has been good at this. I don't even think they've ever reached the level that Vegas got to where they were when they had DeBoer. Is there were times, and it would be periods at a time, sometimes half of games, maybe even full games, where teams just never got set up offensively. You got the puck in and Vegas sent it back out, and it was over and over and over again. And I just feel like that easy exit, that like quick, easy exit, is just not something this team under Cassidy, specifically this year's team, has quite figured out. Last year's team had some problems with it. The team before didn't even really need it, at least towards the end when it was at their best. They did need it during the middle of the season when Stone was out. In the postseason, it was like they're just executing these exit passes over and over and over again and popping transition. And it's like there's no need for the board and out. There's no need for the high flip. There's no need for the long stretch pass to hit out. We can make 2 passes and get out of the zone and get that thing going offensively. This team, that's how they get in trouble. Last night's a good example. The game against Montreal is a great example of it. The game against Utah is a good example of it. The other couple games against Utah are good examples of it, where it's like they want to get out of the zone with possession. The first thought when any of the 6 defensemen get on the puck is we're going to make a pass, and then we're going to make another pass that's going to get us out of the zone, and we're going to be carrying the puck through the neutral zone, as opposed to finding a way to just get it across the blue line. The first thought when DeBoer was here was get the damn thing across the blue line as quickly as we could possibly do it. Now, if there's a way to do it in a controlled way, we will do that. That's part of, I just wish that tool was still in the bag. Or at least that's one where it's like, all right, it's not going well with controlled exits. Let's go to that. Let's go to uncontrolled exits real quickly. And I don't know that that's there. The thing that I would want from Gallant is there was a certain sense of joy, I think. And it's so like, it's such like an intangible bullshit thing. And I know that, but like, there was such a sense of like talking about having fun, talking about the games being more enjoyable, and having like just the overall sense of being excited for everybody, being there for everybody, having every game be us against them, that I just don't know exists. And I wish we could have that back. And it's not necessarily for winning the games. Like, I don't think that that portion would actually make the team all that much better. It probably wouldn't change it all that much. But what I think it did do is like that team, because of their partially because of their head coach and because of the way that they were constructed, the first couple year teams were very much you wanted to know the whole story. You wanted to know everything about all of the different players. You wanted to know who hates who and who's standing up for who and why are we mad at this team and all these different things. And I thought it made the regular seasons much more interesting and the storylines much more interesting. And therefore, I thought it made the highest highs higher. And I don't think it changed the lowest lows, right? So that's part that, like, just for the overall storyline of the team, I kind of wish we had that back. And I do think Gallant was a huge part of that. Um, that's not coming back. Like, that's just not coming back. One of the other questions was if Brad Marchand's available, should the Golden Knights poke around? Absolutely. He would be a wonderful fit for this team. With obviously, we know he's done well with Cassidy. If that's even potentially an option, yes. Like, I don't know what the price would be on that, but no doubt, if Brad Marchand's available, yes. Now, like, if it's there and possible, let's do it. Like, he would, my God, would the roster look unbelievable with him at the top of it. Like, the depth, like putting everything back in place would be so easy if he were in it. Do I think that's going to happen? I do not. So Eichel, that's one that, so a lot of the focus is going to shift onto Eichel's next contract at some point, presumably at the end of this season. I think it does kind of shape what happens at this deadline, what happens moving forward, is what the expectation is going to be on Eichel's contract. And let me just start with this, and that is that the 100-point season that seemed almost inevitable is actually becoming like a real chase now. And I hope that that stays interesting from now until all the way till the end, because I do think it would be fun for this team to finally have a 100-point player. I think he's going to get his point per game, no problem. I think he gets over 82 and no problem. If there are injuries, he's certainly going to be above whatever number of games he's played. That's actually happened. It happened in the 56 game season. I believe two guys, I think it was Stone and Pacioretty, both had a point per game that season. So that's not like a groundbreaking thing. 100 is a groundbreaking thing. So I think that's one where it's like, I hope we get there. I hope we have that interest the rest of the season. And it's like, man, I really hope he finds a way to get that, because that is going to be another thing to keep an eye on that's going to keep a lot of these games more interesting than just, I hope we win to get more standings points so that we can be clear of what, like, it doesn't really matter. I like the storylines. I like the just the camaraderie that comes with what some of those things offer. So I'm hoping that that is the case and we can get there. As far as the contract, there's a couple things that I think are interesting in this contract. First off, he has a no move clause already. I would assume it's a non-starter to not have a no move clause. Like, I don't think there's a way to sign him without a full no move clause. So that inevitably makes it more difficult and more challenging when we get towards the back end of the deal. He's going to be 30 when he signs it, so he'd be 37 or 38 depending on if he goes 7 or 8. I would assume, based on his history, he's probably going to want to cash in. He's the type of player that looks at the history of the league, looks at what his impact is going to be on the league. And if he's going to be a player that's going to have had what was damn near close to a Conn Smythe winner, followed by a great regular season, followed by the first 100-point season in Golden Knights history, I think it's somewhere in the 13s to 14. I think it's going to be quite expensive. I do think the Golden Knights get it done. I don't think there's all that much risk of him walking, although I said a lot about that about Marchessault years ago, and that changed pretty quickly. I'm not all that concerned about Marchessault or about Eichel not being here. Now, what type of negotiation is it? I think it's going to be a tricky one. I don't think it's going to be one that's just going to pop up out of nowhere. I think you're going to start hearing rumors about it, and they're going to there will be some negotiation through the media, through Twitter, through some of the bigger reporters, that it's like he wants to get this type of player money. I think the Golden Knights want to do 5 years, 6 years, as opposed to 7 or 8. And I don't think he's going to be interested in that, nor do I think he should be interested in that. So that is the part of it that I look at and I say, that's where I think it can get a little bit contentious. I'm hoping, just based on just the way that last year went with Marchessault and how it ended, that I hope that this thing gets done sooner rather than later. It obviously cannot get done until the end of this league season, which is July 1st. So we can't have one until then, but I hope that it happens quickly after that. Which former Golden Knight would you want back? At this point, I think it's pretty clear it would have to be Tuck. If that's an option, I would love to have him back. I don't necessarily actually think he fits perfectly for the things that I'm talking about. Like, I don't know that he's the defensive style of player that we want. He's good on the penalty kill, so that's an aspect that I would really like, but he's not the most conscientious with the puck at all times, is the way that I'll put it. There were some turnovers just in that last game that the Golden Knights played against Buffalo. If you watch them with any consistency, you will notice he's a very risk-oriented player. He's willing to make that risky play to try to make something happen, and that's not necessarily what I think you want to be plugging into this lineup at this point. That being said, I think that this team's good enough and that they can have the other pieces to cover some of that up, that all of the benefits that he would bring, I'd be very interested in having him. Thanks again to the Jimmerson Law Firm for sponsoring all of our Periscopes this season. Please join us at Giordano's on Tuesday to watch the Nashville game, watch the return of Marchessault, or at least the return of playing against Marchessault. Should be a very interesting game. Free pizza is going to be available if you win the game that we put out for you and your entire table. So bring a group and come play the game. It's going to be fun. I'd like to have good attendance on this one so that we can continue doing these as we move through the season. And I'm hoping once we get to the playoffs that every playoff game will be able to be giving away free pizza to one table. We need good attendance during the regular season to do that. Hopefully, if you're not doing anything on Tuesday afternoon into the night, game starts at 5. Come as late as 5:36. We'll be there all the way through the game. We can even stick around afterwards and chat if you want to do that. I'm never really in a rush because I have nothing to do. So hopefully you can do that. We'll see you on Tuesday. Thanks again to the Jimmerson Law Firm. That's it. Good night.